The company that owned computing saw the personal computer coming, built the best-selling one, and still lost the future to a garage startup it dwarfed. Why is the phone in your pocket made by Apple and not by IBM? The answer is not a person and not a product, but a quiet machine. It decided what would sit in your pocket decades before you ever held one. To feel how strange this story is, you need the giant's true size first. In 1961, IBM owned about 2/3 of the entire American computer market. Its product was a room-sized computer, too expensive to own, so companies rented its time. People called these machines mainframes, and mainframes were simply what computing meant. In every office, buyers repeated the same safe sentence: no one gets fired for buying IBM. Today, that same giant is worth a small fraction of the company that made your phone. IBM was not blind, and it was not lazy, and it was not stupid. Every easy explanation is about to fail, one by one, inside its own headquarters. If IBM owned computing, why is the thing in your hand an Apple? That size was not inherited, because IBM had gambled its life to get it. In the 60s, IBM's president, Thomas Watson, bet the company on one new family of machines. Building it cost about $5 billion, twice what the whole company earned in a year. The gamble worked, and the family of machines swallowed the market whole. For the next 20 years, nobody bought a serious computer without calling IBM first. Its room-sized machines ran the banks, the airlines, and the tax office. Here is the part you need for everything that follows. Out of every dollar a mainframe brought in, IBM kept a famously thick slice. That kept slice is called margin, and fat margins were the empire's real product. Toys, by comparison, keep a thin slice, and thin slices cannot feed an empire. Margins like that buy laboratories, lawyers, and time. Thin ones buy apologies. How dominant does a company have to be before its own government gets scared? In 1969, the American government sued IBM for holding a monopoly over computing. Government lawyers pressed the case for 13 straight years and then simply gave up. Washington walked away, which told the world the giant was simply permanent. Being sued for monopoly is what winning looks like from a courtroom. Betting against IBM sounded insane, and you would have lost that bet. It was selling $46 billion of machines every single year. The stock market answered by crowning IBM the most valuable company on Earth, and that is exactly when the future knocked, wearing the shape of a toy. The toy at the door had come from a suburban garage in California. In 1976, two young founders started a computer company in the family home of one of them. One of the two was Apple's co-founder, a young man named Steve Jobs. The two of them assembled the first machines by hand, right there in the house. Their Apple II went on sale the next year, priced about $1,300. A mainframe cost more than a house. This thing cost less than a car. To IBM's world, that price was not a business. It was a rounding error. Serious customers rented serious machines, and hobbyists soldered toys in garages. The garage and the tower were not yet enemies. They were not even neighbors. But a toy that keeps getting better does not stay a toy forever. You know how this ends because the proof is in your pocket. So the giant owned computing, the toy was a joke. Then why is your phone an Apple? The toy was noticed inside IBM almost immediately. This is the part where every giant is supposed to be blind, and IBM was not. In 1980, a proposal to build a small, cheap IBM computer reached the very top. The very top of IBM was a room, the management committee that ran the empire. Some of the men in that room had a reaction, and it survives word for word. They called it the dumbest thing we've ever heard of. If you had seen the numbers yourself, you would have laughed too. Business schools now have a name for what was sitting in front of them. A cheaper, worse product that starts out as a toy, then grows up faster than anyone needs. Innovators like that would later be named disruptive technologies, and they hunt giants specifically. The disruptive part is not the gadget. It is what the gadget does to the empire's math. And the room could see the invader clearly. That is what makes this story strange. Because here is the twist. The same room that laughed also said yes. IBM decided to build the dumbest thing it had ever heard of. If you want to see what it was running from, follow what it did next. What the Empire did next was strange, and the strangeness is the clue. IBM's chairman, Frank Carey, carved one small unit out of the Empire's body. The unit answered only to the very top, and every normal IBM rule was waived. No committees, no planning cycles, no headquarters. A garage in everything but name. It set up shop a very long way from headquarters, far outside the Empire's walls. Its leader was the engineer handed the impossible job, a man named Don Estridge. Estridge summed up the whole plan in one sentence. If you're competing against people who started in a garage, you have to start in a garage. Starting in a garage meant building nothing the slow, proud, expensive IBM way. So the team skipped IBM's factories and bought the key parts off the shelf. The machine's brain, its processor, came from Intel, its soul, the operating system, from Microsoft. Their machine would be a recipe anyone could read, made of parts anyone could buy. Engineers call that open architecture, and it made the machine fast to build and easy to copy. Fast won the day. The IBM PC shipped in August 1981, about a year after approval. For an empire that took years to move, 1 year was garage speed. The price tag was toy money, nothing a mainframe salesman could bring himself to respect. So the empire that laughed built itself a garage. What exactly was it running from? The garage gamble did not just work, it embarrassed every forecast in the building. 3 years in, IBM was selling $4 billion of personal computers a year. That was more than twice Apple's entire take from personal computers. The empire had beaten the garages at their own game, in their own price range. Corporate buyers finally had a personal computer that nobody would fire you for buying. Estridge, the engineer who ran IBM's garage, was made president of a new division. His shop grew to 10,000 people and shipped more than 1 million machines. A giant, it seemed, could out-startup the startups just by renting itself a garage. Then Steve Jobs, the garage founder himself, came calling with an offer. He asked Estridge to run Apple itself, and the money offered ran into the millions. Estridge turned him down and stayed with the empire. The man who wrote the garage rule saw no reason to change teams. Every scoreboard you could check agreed on the winner, and every scoreboard was about to be wrong. The wrongness began in a pie shop in Texas. In 1982, 3 managers from Texas Instruments sat in a booth at the House of Pies. All 3 had steady careers, and all 3 were about to trade them for pie. On a paper placemat between coffee stains, they sketched a computer. Not a new computer, a copy of IBM's, minus the one part IBM actually owned. After all, the recipe was public, and every ingredient was openly for sale. They put in $1,000 each and named the sketch Compaq. $1,000 each against the most valuable company on the face of the earth. If you find that funny, so did everyone inside IBM. But the placemat men had seen the door the giant left open. Copying the body was easy because the recipe had been published on purpose. The machine was legal to copy almost. One locked room stood in the way. The locked room was the BIOS, the small startup code IBM had written itself. Copy that code directly and you go to court. So the placemat men built a clean room. Engineers who had never seen IBM's code rebuilt its behavior from scratch, lawyers watching every keystroke. The copy cost about $1 million, and it was perfectly, maddeningly legal. In its first year, the placemat company sold $111 million of computers. No startup in history had ever grown that fast. And the door was not just open for them, because the suppliers sold to everyone. The same 2 suppliers who sold IBM its brain and soul would sell them to anyone, which means every clone was the real thing, and the badge was the only difference left. The war stopped being IBM against Apple that day. It became IBM against the children of IBM's own machine. The clones were legal, the suppliers armed everyone, and IBM was still winning. So why would winning not be enough? The answer had been sitting inside IBM's own files since before the garage opened. Why would the biggest computer company on Earth need a garage at all? IBM had run an internal study on what building a cheap computer would actually cost. The finding deserves a slow reading because it hands you the whole story in one sentence. Buying just the parts, through normal IBM channels, cost more than the finished machine's retail price. The shelves were cheaper than the giant's own hallways. The biggest computer company on Earth could not build a cheap computer, no matter how hard it tried. Not because its people were slow, but because of who it already sold to. Every company lives inside a web of customers and suppliers it cannot afford to disappoint. That web has a name now, the value network, and it decides what you can build. IBM's web was mainframe buyers paying mainframe prices, which means every habit in the building was a fat margin habit. A cheap machine needs a body built for thin slices, so the garage was not a stunt. It was the only organ IBM could grow that ran on toy margins. That is what Estridge's garage was for. It was the empire fleeing its own bloodstream. The rules the chairman waved were not red tape. They were the mainframe body itself. And a body that cannot build the future will not get to keep it either. IBM won the personal computer war. That part needs saying plainly. It outsold Apple 2-1, and its design became the world's standard. By the middle 80s, if you said computer, you meant IBM's design or a copy of it. Then follow the profits instead of the scoreboard, and the picture inverts. Within a decade, IBM's share of its own standard collapsed from 80% to a fifth. The profits migrated to the suppliers and the cloners, the owners of the actual ingredients. The suppliers owned the brain and the soul. The cloners owned the price. Every clone sold made the standard stronger and its inventor poorer. So IBM won the market and lost the standard, which is why winning was not enough. Owning a market means your rules set its prices. Winning just means your badge sells today. Years later, an engineering magazine wrote the ending in one headline. How the IBM PC won, then lost, the personal computer market. You might object that any competent giant would simply have kept the garage sealed off. So IBM did everything right and the future still walked out. Who inside the empire answers for that? Keeping the garage sealed off is exactly what the textbook now prescribes. And IBM had already done it, years before the textbook existed. But then its garage did something unforgivable. It succeeded beyond anything in the plan. What does a planned empire do with the success it never planned? $1 billion of revenue showed up in a budget where nobody had written it down. As one account put it, the money, not being in anyone's business plan, appeared to come out of thin air. In a planned empire, unplanned money is not a gift. It reads as a threat. The divisions that did follow IBM's plan began asking why the garage got to skip it. The resentment won, and the empire began pulling its garage back inside the machinery. Estridge, the engineer who ran IBM's garage, watched the old walls grow back around it. None of this was a blunder. It was the empire's planning logic working exactly as designed. An empire is a machine for repeating what worked, so it attacks what its plans cannot describe. If you blame bad execution, you're just giving the machine a nicer name. And a machine this consistent deserves its real one. In 1997, a Harvard Business School professor named Clayton Christensen published the pattern's autopsy. One business magazine ranked it among the most important books ever written about business. He had studied an industry where giants died so fast you could watch it happen. Hard drives. The companies that died were the well-run ones, and they died of being well-run. Serving your best customers a little better every year is what good management means. He called that sustaining innovation, the safe kind of new. And every dollar spent on it beats, on paper, a dollar spent on toys. So ask yourself the uncomfortable question. Was the committee actually right to protect the mainframe? On every number in front of it, margins, best customers, returns, the answer was yes. That is the machine. Nobody has to be stupid because every smart choice feeds it. His book even prescribed the escape: give the toy its own small company to grow up in. IBM had run that exact play a decade early and then taken the greenhouse apart. Naming the machine did not stop it. By then, the bill was already printed. The bill arrived in the early 90s, and it broke every record in corporate history. In a single year, IBM lost about $8 billion, more than any American company ever had. A new chief executive, Lou Gerstner, cut tens of thousands of jobs and pointed the survivor at services. IBM survived, and its survival is the point. It saved itself by leaving the cheap computer business behind. Then the empire sold its whole PC business to Lenovo in a deal worth about $1.75 billion. The company that invented the PC business no longer wanted to be in it. A few years later, the buyer held a company celebration called Pride Day. Employees walked the aisles peeling IBM stickers off machines and pressing on their own. The empire that outlasted 13 years of federal siege peeled off with a fingernail. So the machine has a name, and IBM sold the business it invented. How does this end with Apple owning your pocket? Apple should have died in the same decade of the same machine. The machine that ate IBM's empire had been chewing on Apple too. By 1996, Apple was dying in public, and Fortune magazine wrote the obituary early. It warned that the company that invented the personal computer would likely disappear. Steve Jobs, the co-founder who had left a decade earlier, came back through a company Apple bought. The rescue that followed still reads like a misprint. The next year, Microsoft, the sole supplier IBM had made rich, put money into Apple. $150 million bought Apple time, while the keynote crowd hooted at the deal. The empire's old subcontractor was now the money keeping the garage company breathing. Survival, though, is not the same as a future. Apple still needed one of those. So the obituary was typed, and the rescue was borrowed. How does this company end up owning your pocket? The future Apple found was, at first, a music player. At its peak, the iPod owned 76% of its entire market. That is the exact seat where the machine eats you. A bestseller that's safe is precisely what a committee defends to the death, because every number says defend it. Apple pointed the machine at itself instead. In January 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a bare stage and announced a phone. The announcement named its own bestseller as an ingredient: a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The iPhone was built to swallow the iPod whole on purpose in public. Killing your own bestseller before a stranger can is the machine's only known escape. The trick is called self-disruption, and no giant had ever run it on itself so coldly. It worked, because the cheap thing eating the bestseller was also Apple's. The iPod shrank, the iPhone grew, and the winnings stayed in the family. 9 years later, the count of iPhones sold past 1 billion, which is why the story's last stop is the phone already in your hand. So put the whole machine back together one last time, holding your phone. For decades, the safest sentence in business was that no one gets fired for buying IBM. That sentence was the machine talking, because safety is what best customers always buy. IBM listened to its best customers, which means the mainframe always won the budget. Its margins made the cheap machine unbuildable inside, so the future had to be built in a garage. The garage worked, the empire reclaimed it, and the standard's profits walked out with the suppliers. The suppliers grew into empires of their own, selling brains and souls to everybody. Meanwhile, the toy climbed, because toys improve faster than the needs of serious people grow. Nobody in that story was stupid, and that is the horror of it. Every committee was right, every quarter all the way to the cliff. Then one giant, saved from its own grave, chose to knife its bestseller rather than defend it. So here's the answer you were promised. Your phone is an Apple because Apple ran the machine on itself, and IBM obeyed it. One man from the story never got to argue about any of this. Don Estridge, the engineer who ran IBM's garage, died with his wife Mary Ann when their jet crashed on the 2nd of August, 1985. 33 years later, on the 2nd of August, 2018, Apple crossed the $1 trillion line. The calendar does not mean anything by that. It is just what the calendar says. But it is hard to read those two dates and not feel the size of the machine between them. Because the machine did not retire when it finished with IBM. It is running right now, inside every well-run giant you depend on. Somewhere today, a smart committee is probably laughing at some cheap little toy. And the phone in your pocket is the proof of how that always ends. This channel opens up the machinery inside business empires, so subscribe, and we will find the next giant together. The machine that chose your phone is still choosing, and every giant is on its list.